Quiet cracking. It's employees that are still employed. They're working for your business. They're coming in, but they're just showing up. It's the idea that employees are coming to work, but they're doing the bare minimum. It's not because they're lazy. It's because they're typically exhausted. Rage applying. This is when employees fire off a boatload of job applications after a toxic meeting, where employees swipe in to be seen, grab that cup of coffee, I sit by the water cooler, then head back out. All right, boys and girls, we are back. Something exciting today. We've dug through the TikTok trends. We've ripped through the Reddit channels, and we've come up with the 10 most talked about terms in HR today. And what we're going to do is we're going to break them down. We're going to talk about the signals, how organizations are identifying that this is happening within their business, and ultimately how wellness can address these issues head on. So it's exciting, jam-packed, and let's get after it. The first term we're going to talk about today is quiet cracking. So you may not have heard about this, but this is a new trend that we've seen in TikTok posts going viral right now. It's employees that are still employed. They're working for your business. They're coming in, but they're just showing up. Mentally and emotionally, they're checked out. They're burning themselves out. And the reason that we've seen this as big drivers is because of AI. So people are concerned, is AI going to take my job? I'm not getting promotions now. I've seen people potentially getting laid off. And there's some stats that back this up. The stats are Talent LMS in 2025 posted that 54% of employees are feeling unhappy at work. So this is a big, juicy topic that organizations are dealing with right now. And Tim, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's interesting when we were going through the terms we were going to discuss. I don't personally spend a lot of time on TikTok. Like
you're missing out. You're missing out.
You do from your intro, but
we're gonna do a TikTok dance later.
I think burnout's something that is important to me personally, but also for our employees. And I think that when I hear this term quiet cracking, it resonates because I think a lot of times, present company included, we've created this always on culture, and we need to really be aware that our employees, and Clark, you and I are pretty much always on, but we also do a good job of balancing that with family time and things that maybe the employees don't see. And when we're getting back, immediately after hours or sending messages either through Teams or through emails, on the weekends or whatever, if we're not aware that that's creating this culture of always on, we're gonna have employees who do this because we have very wonderful, motivated, mission-driven employees who want to, do the best for our company and for us. And if we're not constantly prefacing things like one very small tweak I've made, if I'm sending an email or a Teams message over the weekend or after hours, just based on my workload, I'm saying, don't answer this until Monday, or don't answer this until you get back, or whatever that is, just to preface, it's okay to not always be on. So I get this. And and I think the scary part of it is it feels, from everything you just said in the definition, it goes from where you would not even recognize it potentially as a leader, and then it just falls off a cliff.
I completely agree with you.
Yeah. So
it's like the thing you don't see, but is occurring. It's like people oftentimes, like you read about people like Robin Williams or other people who have all this success that seems so happy, so satisfied with life, and then they make another decision and they decide to take their own lives. And I mean, that's a gross, really crazy example. But the idea behind this is the same, is that these employees have all this stress, of all this anxiety about what they're doing, but you're oftentimes not seeing it. And that's a challenge. And that's where I think the idea, and the one thing that Tim and I truly believe in, is better health and well-being for your employees and for your organization will create an organization that's more bought in, more engaged, and ultimately better equipped to support the business and the business goals. So I think that if I were to try to help an organization solve this, the wellness fix, as we'd call it, is, as Tim mentioned before, is helping the leadership team be better and more aware to identify these problems sooner. So that's going to be incredibly important. And you can do this through having check-ins, whether it be with the leadership team, but certainly if you have wellness coaches, health and wellness coaches that are on site, to identify these trends that are percolating, to create a safe environment for employees to share the struggles and challenges that they're facing, and ultimately give them alternative and options to allow them to pursue things that will help them get better.
Yeah, I think it has to be the reason I like the direct line to the coaching is I'd love it to say everyone's going to create a culture where employees are very open to be able to come to their bosses and their leaders in their company and say, listen, I'm struggling with anxiety. I'm struggling with depression or stress or whatever that is. And we can kind of, work through is there a path that we need to alter, or is it just you letting me know so I can be aware of it? Not everybody's going to be comfortable with that. And I think back to when I was in corporate America, I wouldn't be comfortable telling my boss that. I just wouldn't. And so instead of kind of, saying, okay, now we're going to wake up tomorrow, Clark, and create this culture where everyone can openly communicate. Yes, you want to start on that path, but also the idea of a coach is this resource that's a third party that's once removed from the company where they're in a safe private area where they can just voice that.
Yeah. And another suggestion as you all are watching this video, and this is something that we included in our free wellness program, so the $0 corporate wellness program, is the concept of the power down hour. 1 hour, one time a week, put it on everyone's calendar so your employees can focus on themselves and those big tasks that never get done because they're constantly getting pulled from left to right. So no emails, no meetings, and just like Tim said, don't reply back to this. You just shut everything else down and let employees focus on the task at hand is another really tangible thing that you could do to support this trend and to limit it from happening within your organization.
Yeah, and important to note too, we're not talking clinical diagnosis here. We're talking about workload that creates stress, workload that creates anxiety or anxiousness, things like that. This is a very different topic if we're talking about things that are of a clinical nature.
Yeah. Quiet quitting. So at the peak of the pandemic, past that point, quiet quitting was all over. I think we all know what this is, but I will restate what this means. It's the idea that employees are coming to work, but they're doing the bare minimum. It's not because they're lazy. It's because they're typically exhausted or they perceive there's this lack of recognition or appreciation for the work that they're doing. So at the peak of the pandemic, let's see, 2022, 2023, Gallup poll had 50% of US employees were quiet quitting. I mean, half of your workforce in the past couple of years were going through this trend of I'm here, but I'm not really here.
Yeah, this is the opposite of the Jerry Maguire quit, correct? This is this is
What a great movie, by the way. And we got to put that up on the screen a little. Outside the show me the money quote, but it's like, talk about Renee Zellweger. I'm with you, Tim. Get my goldfish and let's go.
That's right. Who's coming with me?
Who's coming with me?
So this is, again, leadership awareness. This is when you're seeing an employee that typically is sharing a ton of ideas, is enthusiastic, all of a sudden they're not sharing ideas. All of a sudden their body language is disengaged, which you can even start to see even through we're mostly virtual, so you can see that through Teams messages. So this fully aligns with wellness, and this again is an area where wellness is a very largely defined word that is not just fitness, nutrition, sleep, stress, and all these other things. It's recognition, building recognition systems. As I'm speaking right now, and probably could list off 5 things that employees of ours have done in the last week that have impressed me, and I haven't recognized it, and that's a shame. Yep. So for me, and guess what? When we're done, we're only on point 2. By the time we're on 10 and we wrap up, when you do this, am I going to immediately do that, or am I going to go to my next meeting? So we have to almost build systems in place that allow us to recognize those who are doing great things. Also align work with a purpose. I think, I mentioned in the earlier point, we're mission driven. That's great. We want to help people. We genuinely want to change lives. I think if we could align the job with that purpose, it does make a big difference in the overall health and wellness of employees.
Yeah. And to your point of, I mean, again, another $0 wellness strategy you can implement today to address this. These employees are feeling the pain, they're feeling the burnout. And as Tim brought up, the idea of this recognition, outside of Tim doing this from a leadership perspective, the top down recognition is great. But if you can create an environment in which your company has this peer recognition, is incredibly helpful, especially in a virtual environment when employees don't see what others are doing. It's hard to identify what's happening, and it's harder to show appreciation for those employees that are just carrying a big load and are grinding through the process with you and feel that they have no appreciation and no value because they don't hear from you. So it's definitely that trend. And the wellness fix here is if you can create that culture of wellness and well-being, if you can create a culture where you're engaging your own employees to interact with each other, you can ultimately create an environment where people feel more supported and more energized at the workplace. And naturally, they're going to lean back into the process because they're going to feel like, wow, this feels really good. I feel motivated and supported within the organization.
Yeah, and train your managers to re-engage with these individuals and understand they're disengaged because they're protecting themselves. They're protecting themselves from burnout. And this is their kind of way of putting boundaries around not letting themselves get burnt out, where they're, again, just meeting your job requirements, but that's it.
So I was still deep into TikTok, my friend, for this
Oh,
next
nice.
one, deep into TikTok.
Like it.
Rage applying.
Oh my
So
goodness.
this is when employees fire off a boatload of job applications
Okay.
after a toxic meeting, a stressful week. And what's interesting to see is that the primary drivers for this is that the employee feels that it's a toxic culture. They're getting poorly recognized within the workplace, or they have this massive amount of stress. And Tim and I recently, we were hiring for a position and we had nearly 300 candidates apply for this job. And many of those candidates just, we wondered, why are you even applying for this position? So maybe they were going through that rage applying because they certainly weren't qualified for the position, but they wanted to just go to where the grass was greener. And the recent data that I found to support this is Robert Walters. They had a study come out that said 67% of professionals have rage applied. That's crazy. So when you're looking through that bulk of resumes coming through on LinkedIn or Indeed or wherever you are, maybe 3/4 of them don't even deserve to be there, and they're just applying because they want to apply, which is crazy. Crazy brain drain for your team to sort through that, and disappointed that those employees feel like they don't have the right setup within their own organization.
I saw this stat that employees can apply for, I think, over 50 jobs in a matter of minutes. So that kind of supports your point of they're not even vetting these jobs. This is an outlet for them to say I'm frustrated and I'm going to explore what else is out there because it's just going to make me feel better but not address the frustration. And so it's kind of a dual purpose to fix this. Number one is managers have to really be aware of it early. I'm guessing this is a difficult one to be aware of early. I'd say if you see somebody who's, you and I are always on LinkedIn. If you see an employee who's never on LinkedIn and all of a sudden there's a lot of activity there, my guess is that's some sort of an indicator that there's,
Wow, look at that new headshot. You look great.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah, if they have the new glamour shot and
Yeah.
they're all of a sudden boosting up their profile, it could be an indicator. I just think that also be aware this is most likely probably not about compensation. This is
Yeah.
about some underlying frustration with the company that if you can just notice it and really establish open lines of communication with your employees, it's never going to be perfect, but you're taking the right steps towards at least diffusing that frustration.
I mean, employees don't want to leave, just like a relationship. So you think of rage applying, I think of like swiping right. It's like you're just going to say yes to everyone in the dating world and then see what happens afterwards. Like, oh, this might be kind of cool. Like, let me try this because I just swipe. And as Tim mentioned, 50 applications in a matter of minutes, which is crazy. And it just, all the amount of capital that is wasted within an organization to evaluate these resumes coming through, it just comes back into this cycle, this spin wheel. But people only do that when they're unhappy, to Tim's point. And it's less about compensation. It's about feeling appreciated. It's about that culture of, does my organization care about me? Or is it this care washing concept where people are here, but they're not really here? Organizations are talking about wellness and well-being, but the employees know it's just a bunch of BS and that the organization doesn't really care about them. So having the right types of programs to engage the workforce that you have that's relevant for that workforce and workforce that their specific needs is ultimately going to help you keep your employees feeling healthy and supported, and ultimately really engage on the mission of the business.
Yeah, I think if we're going back to the zero cost wellness strategy, one thing we've done in the past that I think helped you and we've done anonymous, I guess you'd call them pulse surveys, or just kind of things where people can, in a very safe, comfortable, confidential environment, kind of give the good, the bad, the ugly about how they're being managed, about their happiness, about all the things. Are we aligned with their mission and their vision for the company? And number one, that gives them a safe place to give feedback. But number two, you have to do something with that feedback. And it doesn't always feel great when everyone isn't 10 out of 10. This is the best time of my life. But it also allows us to potentially cut different issues off at the pass with other employees who aren't rage applying, but are maybe a week away or 2 weeks away from rage applying. I just like saying rage, by the way.
It's good. Rage Against the Machine. We should maybe put that in there as well.
Yeah,
I'll dust off that little record from our youth. So this one, I had lots of fun researching. It was fun to watch. So if you want to get your popcorn, you want to have a little fun, let's talk about revenge quitting. So this is the trend that people are quitting in dramatic and recorded viral fashions, leaving a statement, going on the PA and telling the entire workforce what they think about it, hiring bands to deliver their resignation letter. It's crazy. And
Wow.
the primary drivers that we are seeing in this space is employees feel betrayed. They feel that there's, of course, the poor culture, that goes without saying, but they feel that there's a lack of support. So if you go to YouTube and you search revenge quitting, you'll see tons of videos on this topic. And some are very cringe-worthy, but people that do these videos, that post them, that record them, that think about what they're going to do, they're obviously not happy. They're feeling burnt out. They're feeling stressed out. And they're saying that I'm going to go on such another extreme to tell everyone what I feel about this organization. And think about that. If you are the HR leader within that organization and you have one of these situations, it's certainly not going to help you when the new employees go and search on Glassdoor or search on YouTube or search in Reddit channels about your organization. They're going to find these videos. It's going to be very hard to recruit talent when that's out there.
Wow. So this is the Jerry Maguire if it was filmed on TikTok. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, I would say, but it's the Jerry Maguire. You still felt kind of good. You rooted for the guy. In some of these situations, you're like, oh, I don't know if I want to root for them anymore. Especially when you do a lot of the old, the F bombs. A lot of F bombs I've seen in my videos. So yeah, wasn't meant for the 18 and under crowd.
No. Okay.
It was not a family friendly show, as they would say.
This is a good one for the term of it. I think it all goes back to everything we've been speaking about, which my guess is this isn't one incident with the employee where they're immediately, angry at the world, where they need to let the world know about all the potential issues or even made up issues that are with the company. I think this is just about unresolved conflicts, in my opinion. This is about managers not listening to their employees, not creating an area of communication where if things just go unresolved, that stuff festers. And we've all seen it in even our personal lives, right? When you sweep something under the rug, maybe it's in a friendship or a relationship with my wife, you sweep it under the rug, let it fester. It becomes bigger than it ever was. So again, no secret sauce here, but try to get ahead of as many unresolved conflicts as you can as a manager or a leader.
Yeah, it's a lot of what we're saying seems so obvious, but do you have an environment that you could do regular check-ins? Maybe, again, a free strategy you can implement is just having a channel on Slack, a channel on Teams, where you talk about these wellness wins or these victories, or letting people create that culture of care within the organization. They're sharing stories, they're sharing things that they've overcome or that they've succeeded at, and that will help to prevent and or potentially, as Tim was talking about before, prevent the idea that this will bubble up into them revenge quitting. And if they're going to quit, they're going to move on to another organization. I mean, we have that happen to us all the time. Sometimes they're taking their talents to South Beach. They're moving on. And that's okay, because if you create that environment that you want to see your team grow and progress and continue to advance, and they're looking for the best, most satisfactory lives for themselves and for their families, I'm never going to prevent an employee from moving on. Oftentimes I'll say, put me as a letter of recommendation for yourself. You don't want to have the situation where they torch you in the organization because they felt like you never heard about them, you never cared about them. That's the big difference here.
Yeah, I was watching the Kingdom on ESPN about the Chiefs, and one of the things that really impressed me that I hadn't known was Andy Reid stays in touch with a lot of his players who are either he has to cut or he has to trade, or just because of the business of the game and then the general nature of that, he just stays in touch with them. And it always impressed me. And I think you and I, we don't have it all figured out. And I think it's important for us to keep reemphasizing that. Like, even as we're going through these things, we're not saying these are all areas we have 100% figured out. These are areas we're just willing to constantly improve on. And I think that willingness to improve and that genuine desire for employees to be just in a position where their careers are thriving and they're having more good days than bad is going to ultimately probably encourage us to make some changes right after this recording.
Yeah. So, coffee badging. Employees have come back to work. Big push. Return to the office. Get in here 5 days a week. Get in here 3 days a week. So now this new quasi-viral trend is coffee badging, where employees swipe in to be seen, grab that cup of coffee, I sit by the water cooler, then head back out. This is happening because there's this rigid concept of return to office, the mandate that organizations are placing on their employees. And employees are feeling like, geez, man, there's this massive lack of trust right now. So I'm going to come in, I'm going to check the box, make sure everyone sees me. I'm going to ask that question, and then I'm going to go punch right back out again. And a recent data point around this, which was pretty surprising to me. I know that a lot of organizations, as Tim mentioned previously, that we're a virtual organization, and many people have stayed virtual since COVID, and others have kind of changed their tune. And I miss having our team in person because it's fun. It wasn't because we don't trust them, but it was because it was fun and it was exciting that people come together. But nearly 60% of hybrid workers, so they have to come into the office sometimes and they stay home sometimes, 60% admit to doing this coffee badging, where they just check the box and they come into the office. Pretty crazy.
Yeah. So I coffee badging. Okay. So two thoughts come to mind as you're describing the definition to that. One, everything we've been saying, let's recognize these things, but also there should be clear objectives. And this has been difficult for us because we have employees in so many different various roles that are doing so much for our company, but there should be clear established guidelines of what a successful day or week or month is for that employee, where they can't just show up. There should be, I mean, if you are hired for a job and you have to move 50 rocks from point A to point B, and you just show up and you're sitting on pile A, I mean, we as managers should clearly recognize this, number one, and number two, establish that your job is to move the rocks from pile A to pile B. And if it's not happening, all right, let's dig into this. So I think that's kind of twofold, with the addressing the employee's concern, of course, but number two, having clear established guidelines.
Yeah. I'm gonna say the quiet part out loud right now.
Do it.
Who cares if your employees come back to the work? I want them to work, come back to the office. As Tim mentioned, if you're moving boulder A to box B, then yes, you should be in an environment that you can do that. But the notion that organizations don't trust their employees, then yeah, you deserve to have that employee be upset and to just swipe in and not care. You need to create an environment, as Tim mentioned, something if you want your employees to come back to the office, have them feeling energized, make it purposeful, create an environment that they are super excited to bring value, or it's creative time for them to spend with their employees. But to just have people check in because it's a mandate, it just seems like what a wasted amount of value that you're placing on this notion that employees should come back in when that employee may be commuting an hour and a half, like especially where I live at, close to New York City. You can commute an hour and a half into the city each way. That's 3 hours of a commute. That's 3 hours that you're not spent maybe being productive here doing your work, or that's 3 hours I'm not spent with my family. What do you think your employees are going to feel when they're going through and doing that when they're just coming in to check the box? It's ridiculous.
Agreed. And the other side to that is you mentioned how we miss being in person. And I genuinely miss that, but I don't miss it because I want to check in on our employees more. I miss it for the ping pong.
Absolutely. I was gonna say you had to leave with the ping pong. I was like, let's break out the old ping pong table, which was awesome.
I was thinking, do I give more of the, I miss it because
give the real answer. It's the ping pong and the fun we had.
Ping pong, yeah. But I miss being able to just go up to an employee and check in on them and how are you doing? And there's an area of connection that I find difficult with 100%. And so that's why, we're getting the team together soon. And I hope we do that even more frequently, because I do think there's a balance you can find for that camaraderie.
All right. We've heard in the past, and you probably remember when you were in school and maybe at certain companies, you're like, thank God it's Friday. So we always remember the TJIFs of the world. Now it's bare minimum Mondays, which is a trend where employees intentionally slow roll their Mondays to cope with stress. And this is pretty crazy because if you think about it, if your employees dread Mondays as much as they do, and they're slow playing that first day and they're TGIFing later in the week, it's not a calendar problem that you have. It's certainly a culture problem. And you probably have that square peg trying to fit into a round hole. There is something amiss there.
Agreed. It's funny. So what is this sluggish work? Is this more sick days on Monday?
Yeah, just like coming in and just not really giving it 100%. So I was thinking, and you probably agree with this, it's the first thing in the morning is you should swallow that toad. It's like you need to go and tackle the biggest, most difficult task. And in these situations, they're like, I have 5 days of this work. I'm sure as heck not going to push too hard on day one. I don't want to get burnt out versus giving 100% from that first minute you can actually impact the organization.
Yeah, I think that there's some value to looking at the cycles of work too with your employees, right? If you're seeing no meetings on Monday, this is probably an indication this is happening. If you see, more meetings being pushed to Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, spikes in sick days, low participation in these early week meetings, I think these are all things to be aware of. I also think that employees should be, we have to be aware of situations too, right? If we have Labor Day coming up, and what do we think the Tuesday after Labor Day is going to be, typically for all of our prospective clients that we're going to talk about, it's going to be a little sluggish, so maybe, do you think it's okay to reduce meeting loads after a holiday or something like that? Like I would say that we can be aware of that. We're people, we're humans. We need recovery time.
Yeah. And I think of just like performance in athletics. If I'm going to go run a mile or 10 or whatever, that I am not just going to run a mile. I'm going to start by doing some dynamic. First, I'm going to get the right gear on. I'm going to dynamically warm up. I'm going to slowly get into it. And then I'm going to perform. I'm going to deliver. So if it's 8:00 in the morning on Monday and you're hammering your team over the head with, as Tim mentioned, all these meetings and all these big things, you're probably going to create that culture that's going to fail your employees. But let them ramp up. And especially, you would know your employees and your culture better than we would, and you would know how best to position them for success. But be aware of, if you were to do any sort of sporting or athletics, I think that's a great way. The analogies I like to think about is often, as you could see from Tim and I behind us, we have sports quotes behind us. And it's very easy because many people have competed at some point in their life, whether it be soccer, basketball, baseball, football, one of the big sports, or maybe it's something like chess or gymnastics or something else that, and maybe it's less traditional here in the States. But we all know that you don't just go out and do the things, especially as you get older, especially as you get older, because you'll be smelling the icy hot on me if I just started going crazy, and I wouldn't be able to sit here because you get hurt. And it's the same thing. You don't want to hurt your employees by just grinding on them to have them do this task without warming them up to the task at hand. So that could be your Monday, that kind of wellness Wednesdays. Maybe it's mindful Mondays, and you start out slow, reduce the meeting load, and create an environment where some of that creativity can flourish at the beginning part of the day, and then get them into the later part of the day, more challenging tasks.
Yeah, it's where trust comes in for your employees too. If you're back to our earlier point, if you're establishing clear communication of what needs to be accomplished, you know they're going to pick it back up after you do some of this. It's not a reason to take Monday off, but if we have a holiday, we come back in, we're going to get the job done, and we're going to trust our employees to get the job done.
Yeah. So let's shift slightly to the more traditional terms, the terms that your mother, my mother, our grandmother, the traditional HR terms out there. So this is not the viral TikTok trends, but this is topics that you've spent basically your entire career thinking about and trying to solve. So absenteeism and presenteeism. So absenteeism is missed work days. That's obvious. Presenteeism is being at work, but burnt out to perform. So this is contributed to chronic illness, maybe poor recovery, a variety of stress factors. These are topics that HR leaders have been dealing with for decades, trying to address and trying to create the right environment to prevent this from occurring.
Yeah. So these are the MySpace terms of HR, right? That have been around forever, but they're costly and they need to be addressed. And it's interesting. As you were saying the definitions, my mind went to exercise. And in exercise, there's a concept called blasting and cruising. And it means if you're constantly blasting, you're going to eventually burn out. If you're constantly cruising, you're not going to accomplish your goals. So it's finding the right balance between the two. So I would say, we're talking about wellness here, provide those health and wellness and even mental health resources for individuals, normalize rest, and train leaders on balance. You and I both came up in a world of sales where we were given a phone book and said, work 7 days a week and just keep making the calls. You know as well as I do, that would not have been a sustainable career for the rest of our lives, number one.
It's a young man's game, Tim. It's a young man's game.
But also, your bosses weren't doing that, right? So, I mean, it's like, let's just have a real honest conversation with the end game being productivity. And if the end game is productivity, it's not to fully blast your employees where they're continually now what do you do? If they're constantly blasting them, they're going to resist that through sick days or what they'll call a mental health day, or just a day where they're burnt out and they say they're sick, which, I get it. So that's just an awareness of the work cycles, really, again, normalizing rest and training your leaders on balance.
Yeah. I think the best way to solve this is, if you're having this issue within your workforce, to solve this problem, you do need to implement a wellness program. I mean, full stop. That's what you need. And you should bring in a partner like us to address it. We can support with behavior change programs, health and wellness challenges, content that reaches employees wherever they are at any time of the day. this is the time where you need to bring in experts to support the needs of your workforce, because it is a ticking time bomb that ultimately is going to impact the bottom line for your organization with increased costs, but also the top line with reduced productivity. So you should address this as quickly as you can with vendor resources.
Well, that's an interesting thought too, because if an employee takes a sick day because they're burnout or nearing burnout or stressed or whatever it is, what are they doing on that sick day? Is it really addressing what is causing the burnout? Probably not. So they're just delaying it for 24 hours.
Mm-hmm.
You know, sitting on a couch and binging Netflix, while awesome, does not address your burnout. You're, again, just sweeping it under the rug. So this is interesting because not only is it costly, like if you told me, okay, this was costly, but it's addressing the burnout, it's addressing the stress. Okay, but you're not. So it's really, that's something that just prompted.
Can you give a binge Netflix series you'd recommend to everyone right now? Anything? I mean, you are watching The Kingdom. Anything else that you would recommend?
Yeah, I just finished The Kingdom, and I watched a documentary on the Liver King.
Oh yeah, I've watched it as well.
That was fascinating.
Yeah.
The dishonesty that can come.
He was natty, Tim. He was natty, so natty.
It's crazy. But it was just, honestly, it was sad to see somebody who just fame was their only thing, and they would lie, cheat, steal to do it. But that's my last documentary that I watched.
I got we're watching Top Boy. So it's did you ever watch The Wire?
Yes.
All right. Yep. I mean, iconic, great story. Top Boy, I mean, not quite as deep as I mean, The Wire had more than half a dozen seasons.
Yep.
But this has 3 seasons, at least as of where I am right now. And it's about the London drug scene, where The Wire was about Baltimore drug scene. And they developed the characters interestingly. I mean, The Wire is one of these iconic generational shows, in my opinion, for how they develop all of these great characters. And Top Boy has some of that, but it's just interesting. A lot of correlations I see watching those 2 shows and just knowing it. It was a pretty cool show.
Yeah, I'm familiar with The Wire. I haven't seen it, but I know exactly.
Amazing.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, it's just amazing. I mean, the value of that is they develop the politicians in Baltimore. They develop the legal team and the enforcers police. They develop the drug dealers, the drug lords. They develop the junkies. They develop the community. So everyone within that story, you have stake in their story, and you're rooting for each of them individually to create whatever story they want, including some of the different drug gangs, and you're like rooting for this one or that one because you like this character more. It's just very interesting because usually you think of good guys, bad guys. It's very binary versus there's some good people, there's some not so good people, and here's the flex between all of them.
Wow.
Yeah.
This is on brand too. The
Wire is not on brand for anyone. If they're wondering, The Wire is not on brand for us.
Or I would hope
and nor I would say is the Liver King, Tim, by the way, if you're saying this one's actually on brand.
The last one I watched, it's a new one. It was on The Biggest Loser.
Oh, I watched that as well, yeah.
And I'm not going into the whole thing, but I was so sad they did some study. I think pretty much all of them, or most of them, just gained all the way back, if not more, after, because when they're in this silo, they were exercising for 8 hours a day. They were eating 800 calories. All of a sudden, they're out of that silo and they're not doing it. Obviously, what's going to happen is common sense, and they're begging for an aftercare program and not getting it because that doesn't get ratings.
Yeah.
So that was telling and very.
Also, too, it's like in that environment, as you said it, and this is why I went back down to what do you need in this scenario? You need a program, a solution. And I said that our approach is behavior change, because exactly what the issue is with that. Yeah, exactly. In a confined environment, anyone could do anything. Like you can reduce your calories to 400 to 500. 100%. You can work out for 8 hours a day. But if you don't change behaviors and you don't teach people the right skills when they go back out to the wild, they will likely go back to the same routines and the same behaviors. So if you are deploying a vendor solution and you're looking at addressing absenteeism, presenteeism, you don't want to rely on, I'm going to just do a check the box program and I'm going to do a 10,000 step wellness challenge. Like that's just not good enough. Like that, it's not 1995 and you're launching a wellness program for the first time. Your employees expect more from you, and you need to address the psychology of the challenges that they're facing and help them find the right solutions for where they are today.
Yep. Don't put them at a camp. Put
Yep.
them in their homes where they're on their own at times and developing behavior change. And it has to be the right individuals. Those were trainers who were acting like psychologists and health coaches and just underqualified to really establish that sustainable change.
Yep. All right. Employee engagement is the idea that there's a level of commitment and enthusiasm that your employees bring to work. And oftentimes employee engagement is more of like the VOI, the value on investment solution to wellness versus the ROI, return on investment, which would be reduced healthcare costs for that matter. So if you have an organization where you lack employee engagement, obviously the employees aren't going to be as committed to the mission. They're not going to be as involved in all the periphery projects that the organization might have. They might not support you on social media. And that is obviously a challenge that we believe wellness can directly address and fix.
That's good. So I ran this one because this one's a little vague. I ran this one through ChatGPT, and I'm going to read verbatim what one of the bullet points said, and it hurt my soul. It says, employees crave career conversations and manager support, not ping pong tables. That was with no prompting. Now, listen, I'm not saying it hurts my soul to have career conversations and manager support, but not ping pong tables. I mean, come on. So this is number one, a plug for AI doesn't know it all. We know some things that AI doesn't. And I know ping pong tables do create a culture of fun. That being said, on a more serious note, I do like the idea of discussing careers with employees as opposed to just job function. Mm-hmm. Job function's great. This is what you're doing. But number one, is our company giving you purpose? Is our company giving you the growth that you need? Is it giving you a belonging of where you've wanted to go within your career? If it is, great. If it's not, let's have that discussion. But I love this idea of not just you're an employee, this is where you fit within our company. No, what do you want to be in 5 or 10 years? And back to an earlier point you made, if there's growth that could be involved that's outside of our company, we're into helping people to thrive in their careers as opposed to only helping them thrive in their job function as it positively benefits our company.
Yeah. And as Tim mentioned, you know your organization better than we would. There's certainly some ground rules that probably apply to all that all can benefit from. I think a couple of quick things that you can implement to change how employees perceived around this idea of are they engaged or not engaged is one, you can change some of your meetings from the typical everyone come on Zoom or Teams. We're going to have a sit down. We're going to have an hour. You're all on camera. We need you all focused to having audio only meetings where you get your team out, they get them moving, get them out into the wild. Especially if you're in person, even easier. You guys can walk around the block and just change that culture where people think differently. And also too, getting people moving typically boosts creativity because they're not sitting as Tim and I will be over the next hour, just slowly getting lower and lower on here. Our backs are getting sore because you're sitting here and we're not meant to sit for 8 hours a day, or probably in our cases, 10 to 12 hours a day. Get people moving and help them feel that you as an organization cares about the employees. And so if you want to take it one step further, you can do health and wellness challenges here. You can let your employees form teams. You can get them to create an environment where they're going back and forth in a positive but competitive fashion around certain wellness challenges. Another free idea I would say is that you can implement some lunch and learns, but have your employees do this. So don't just slam in, we want to teach you on AI and how to use AI within the organization. It's more of let Betty talk about her sourdough baking techniques and let her share her story about what makes her happy and satisfied outside of work. It creates that culture that employees are really going to thrive by seeing.
Yeah, and even I want to circle back to our beloved ping pong table. I think the point there, though, and I don't want to lose sight of it, is address the problem. Don't sugarcoat it. You know, if Clark, you're a little grumpy with your wife, the answer might not always be flowers. It might be having a real discussion, understanding why you were grumping and apologizing for it. And I think that's an interesting part here too with the employees. You can't just solve things with Target or Amazon gift cards and ping pong tables. The employees want to be heard. They want to not just have these really vague career conversations with their managers. They want to feel like they're in a position of growth.
Turnover intentions. This is when employees show early signs they're about to leave. Drivers for that, it's lack of growth, feeling unsupported, they're burnt out. It's difficult to identify this, but this is the smoke before the fire. So are employees updating their LinkedIn profiles strangely? Do they have the new shot on there? Are they engaging in things they wouldn't normally engage that are outside of your organization? These could all be leading indicators that you have someone at risk.
Yeah, and probably indicators that could be spotted months before what would eventually be a resignation or something like that. I think there's little areas where we can be aware of that. And one that kind of resonates with me is when we have a team huddle or an all hands call. I know it's not realistic to always be on camera, right? There's things that happen, there's network issues and things. But if you have an employee who consistently is off camera for those things, I mean, there's little indicators that's okay. Are they giving vague answers about, their career? And this goes back to point number 8, which is if you're invested as a manager or a leader in your company in the career of your employees, that dialogue should be very open. And if it's not, that's probably an indicator of this turnover intention.
Yeah. And wellness is a silver bullet for just about every problem. Not all problems, and certainly wellness and well-being solutions can't solve for an employee feeling that there's a lack of growth. And that's what Pew Research showed, that 63% of employees were reporting that lack of growth was the top reason for them to leave. So wellness can't solve that, but wellness can certainly support the stress, anxiety, and other situations that this employee is walking into that organization with, the challenges that they're facing, which makes their job that much more difficult, which makes their job that much less pleasant and enjoyable. So if you can create that culture where employees can peel off some of that baggage before they come into the workforce, and they will ultimately feel that this is an organization that cares, and through thick and thin, which is, Tim and I have been doing this for well over a decade now. And we've had the thick and we've had the thin, we've had the tops, we've had the bottoms, but we both know we're here for the right reasons. We both know that we will always be there to help the other person out. And we certainly try our best to communicate that to our team. And we do it both verbally and non-verbally. So you can say these things, but if you don't act on those things, you don't do those things, your employees are going to smell that this doesn't smell right to them and ultimately feel like this is not the right organization for them.
Yeah, and that's where honest intentions and dialogue really come into place. And us as a small business, we don't have all these different tiers of a growth path, right? We don't have an abundance of directors and VPs and SVPs and C-suite. We're a small business. And so it's really having an understanding of what does growth mean to that employee and how to best facilitate that process.
Workforce resilience. So the ability to adapt and bounce back in times of stress or disruption. Big drivers right now, there's a lot of economic uncertainty. There's still, before it was the return to work, it was COVID, but now it's this economic uncertainty. What's going to happen? Will I have enough money to pay for groceries? And this is very common in the health and well-being space. We often talk about resilience, especially when it comes to like stress management, how to bounce back from difficult times. So this is not going away. And what some of the data from Deloitte in 2024 said that nearly 80% of high performing organizations, so you want to say you want to be top and to the right, you want to be that high top right quadrant. So nearly 80% of high performing organizations focus on managing the energy of these employees, managing the energy and the culture, and not just how many hours people are coming in. So this ultimately can create that shift, that culture shift that you possibly are looking for.
Your job as an employee might be difficult. It just might be. And if that, and it might have a high or a large workload. If that causes stress, burnout, leadership can respond in a couple of ways. They could reduce the workload, therefore making you less valuable of an employee unless it was an unattainable workload. But if it was what was perceived to be an attainable workload, now we're going to lessen that. Okay. Option 2 is we don't do anything and it just leads to burnout. Option 3 is we help prepare them with resilience of how to handle these situations, how to tackle that workload, how to, again, be resilient towards it. And this goes right back as a direct line to a wellness program. Those fundamentals can be applied to anything. Guess what? Workload doesn't stop just with our jobs. Workload applies to fatherhood, to being a husband, to wanting to be healthy. And guess what? There are weeks when it is way too much. The best thing to do is not always just reduce. Sometimes you have to have a healthy understanding of, can I reduce? Should I reduce whatever that full workload is? Or do I just need to help myself cognitively to prepare myself to handle what is always going to be probably a massive amount of responsibility with my life as a whole.
Yeah. And so inevitably, when you think of this resilience, Tim and I, and most in the industry will initially go to stress. So giving them the right tools and techniques to cope. Maybe it's breathing, a little in through the nose, out through the mouth. But let me just throw another suggestion out there. The best biological recovery feature that your body has is sleep. So sleep facilitates everything you possibly can need, from physical healing, mental restoration, overall health improvements. If you can empower your team with better sleep, getting that 7 to 9 hours of sleep, getting your body to fully recover, you will inevitably help them react better and more favorably in signs and times of difficulty where stress is mounting on them. So just another different way to think about how to solve this problem for your organization. And of course, health and wellness programs ultimately can do that. And one that has a sleep focus can be a unique and creative way to help your employees address those difficult times.
Nice.
All right. At the end of the day, all these trends are trends that you're going to face today, that you faced yesterday, you will ultimately face tomorrow. We think that investing in wellness and well-being programs can be a silver bullet to many of these, because if you have a happier, healthier workforce, they're going to be more engaged. They're going to feel more connected to the organization. They're going to have less of the health and wellness baggage coming into the workforce. So they're feeling more connected and better prepared to tackle these difficult challenges. So we think, based upon our decade plus of experience in working with hundreds of thousands of people, this type of solution can address many of the most difficult challenges that you're facing within your organization. And if you are considering a vendor solution, we hope you take a look at us and evaluate how our behavior change programs can empower your organization as well.
And don't buy it for your employees. Participate with your employees in these types of things. It doesn't get easier as you go along, right? I mean, the stress doesn't go away once you're a manager, and this should be something that we're all participating in together.
Yeah. I thought, Tim, you were going to end with, and don't buy the ping pong table.
Oh yeah.
That's what I thought was going to be the end. It was going to be just cut the black on that, like the Sopranos episode.
Or
What
we could do
happened?
a link to a ping pong table and say, because of our affiliates, we made profit off
Yeah.
of this purchase.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for tuning in, and we hope you found these tactics and this conversation helpful.